Hello humans! So, since we're in quarantine and can't leave the house for who knows how long, I had the idea to try and write an entire short story in one day. I'm gonna try and do a handwritten first draft, a typed second draft, and then the first round of edits all in the next 24 hours, hopefully less than 24 hours. By the end of the day, my main goal is just to have a full functional story. Not like the pinnacle of stories, but one that's good enough to maybe let other people read. I have a long list of story ideas that are not really good enough to be like full novel length stories, but they're good enough that I don't want to just scrap them entirely. So I just kind of decided, okay, we'll try and do short stories out of them, and this is one of them. This one, the more I think about it, I think it's going to be really short, so I might do another one of these later with a longer story just to like up the difficulty. It's currently a little before 2:30 a.m. on the 29th, and I'm about to start writing the first draft. See you there. The first page has been completed. Now, on to the rest of it. Most of what I just wrote was stuff that I already had written down in the notes for this one. So after that, it's going to be more creating new stuff, which is going to take longer, I think. It's around 2:41 now, so there's still plenty of time. So I fell asleep because it was 3 a.m. and I thought that was the good time to start working on a day-long project. It is now significantly later than I would like for it to be in the afternoon at this point, and I'm gonna get back to trying because I think it's about 4 o'clock now, so that means I have about 10 hours to get as far in this as I can for the 24-hour mark. It is currently 6 o'clock. Family is out getting dinner and bringing it home for us, so my goal is to be done with the first draft before then. We're almost there. Are we having a nice time? Okay. So I didn't manage to get the whole first draft done before food came, but it is done now. It's about 9 o'clock, so I'm gonna let the first draft rest for about half an hour, and then I'm gonna do the typed second draft after that. To get it done between now and 2 a.m., I'll have about 5 hours to type it, let it rest again, and then do the first round of edits. I think that's possible because it turned out a lot shorter than I expected it to. Like this particular story I thought would be a little longer, but it turned out pretty short, so I think this is definitely possible. A sleepy dog. Another sleepy dog. So I'm about to start doing the second draft, the type draft. I'm just going to go through, type it up basically verbatim, and then go through and add what I think needs to be added and change things up. The typed draft is complete. It is 1:18 a.m. and I must confess I am very tired. It did wind up being really short. It's 1,820 words total. But I think that once I run through the edits, it'll be a little bit longer. There's some things that need to be added so that it'll make more sense, but honestly, I'm gonna call it for tonight. I did 2 drafts of it, and I did really well, so I think that's as close as I could come today to getting a complete short story in a day. So, thank you. I will update tomorrow. It is now 2 days later, I believe. It is all typed. I've been letting it rest for a few days. I haven't gone back and edited it yet, so I'm gonna do that now. I decided that I am gonna read it at the end of this video, so stay tuned for that. Tell me what you think, if you think what edits you think need to be made, stuff like that. Hey, so it is just before 3 a.m. on Sunday, the 3rd, I believe. It's been a few days since I started this whole project, and I am finally at a place where I'm semi-happy with how the story is, so I'm going to read it out and see what you think. Alright, so here's the semi-finished project after, I believe, 5 days. Jack's heart. Jack had been dying for as long as I'd known him, his own heart rotting away inside his chest. It slowed, weakened, refused to pump for him. Such a small little thing to cause so much grief. 9 ounces of muscle and blood, that's all it was. Nothing, really. Everyone has them. All he needed was a heart, and I was more than willing to give him mine. But they wouldn't take it. It was wrong, they claimed, to take a heart still beating and make it beat for someone new. It wasn't even a match, they said. His body would have rejected my heart, attacking it like a disease, like it wasn't his own heart doing the damage. Jack was dying, and every street of this city rang with heartbeats. I walked the streets at night looking for those who seemed distracted, lost, lonely. Those who might not miss their lives too much, whose lives wouldn't miss them much either. They were easy to find. Hearts are worth nothing when they beat and bleed alone. I'd drag the body, still warm, still bleeding, to the hospital, a back entrance few used, where a doctor would be waiting for me. He'd take the body and all the parts they could use would be sent off. A kidney for him, an eye for her, hearts and lungs and livers and skin. Hearts. Cursed, useless, worthless hearts. Off to some other hospital in some other city. Off to pump blood for some other person, someone who didn't matter half as much as Jack. I washed my hands of them all, red splotches falling away and down into a spiral of water into the cold steel sink's drain. I stood back and looked myself over in the mirror. Clean, orderly, not a trace of them left to see. The doctor eyed me from the doorway. "We don't know how much longer Jack has," the doctor said, arms crossed over his chest. Our eyes met in the mirror, tinged with grime, some unknown brown splatters that obscured bits of his face and mine. His scrubs were still smeared with blood. I know. He waited for me to say something else, then sighed. "What'll you do when—" "I won't let that happen," I interrupted. He paused. The silence sat heavy in the air, still scented with blood. "You helped 6 people tonight," he said finally. 2 of them you saved their lives. That's good." He nodded and looked at the ground. The dull buzz of the lights above us and the cement walls surrounded me as I waited for the news that would come next. The doctor didn't speak, so I said what had to be said. But not Jack. He swallowed, still not meeting my eye. "No." I grunted and wiped my hands on my coat. Of course not. Good. I'd called it good. What good was it if Jack was still in pain, still in a bed upstairs slipping away? What was the point if the lives saved weren't his? That was the point, wasn't it? If the doctors couldn't do it, someone had to. Jack deserved to live. That much I knew. Anything past that sentiment didn't matter. "Gotta get back up there," the doctor said. "Can't be gone too long, you know." "Yeah." "Right," he muttered, turning away. "Wait," I said before he could leave. "What?" "I can do one more tonight." He sighed. "I told you I can't be gone from work for too long. People notice. People ask questions. And I don't have good answers. I can't just—" I cut him off. "Jack is worse. He's getting worse every day, and I will not watch him die. Not now. So either you help me with one more tonight, or we try your heart out on him." I gripped the end of the knife sheathed in my belt. "And without me, who will help you with this whatever kind of mess this is?" I kept my voice calm and even. "If Jack dies, I have nothing to lose. If you don't help me, Jack dies. You can put those pieces together any way you like. When you find an answer, tell me. I'd like to get this done sooner rather than later." He stared me down, waiting for me to soften, to crack. But I wouldn't, not with Jack's life on the line. "My shift ends at 3. Meet me here then. If you're late, I leave." "Fine." I let go of the hilt of my knife. Glad we could come to an understanding. The doctor turned to leave. "One last thing," I said. "What?" he said gruffly. "Keep an eye on Jack for me. He's not okay." The doctor nodded. "I will. That's my job, after all, when I'm not down here." He trailed off, not wanting to let the deeds we did reach the air. I didn't blame him. Saying it out loud made it real. If we kept quiet, kept it all inside our heads, we could pretend this was some daydream, some nightmare, some passing thought we didn't need to think of again in the light of day. I would have liked that, to never think about it again. The blood, the bodies, the fear in their eyes once they knew there was nothing left to do but die. But Jack kept me grounded. He reminded me every moment that this was real and present, that I had a job to do, and that there was no room for errors or wasting time. Each beat of his heart, each breath that filled his lungs, each blink of his golden eyes brought him closer to the edge, closer to leaving me forever. I knew he wouldn't love me if he knew what I was doing for him, and that was fine. He didn't need to love me. He just needed to live so I could keep loving him. It would hurt, of course, if he ever found out, but for now he lived in that coveted blissful ignorance, thinking I was anything but what I am. I toyed with the buttons on my coat as the doctor changed out of his blood-stained clothes and left. Back to his work, and I back to mine. I left through the back door again into a parking lot lit sparsely with dim orange-tinted streetlights. The moon above me shone full, but its light was blotted out somewhat by the thick gray clouds, leaving the world below a muted gray, a hazy sort of place. I walked to the front of the building, the distant sounds of cars and the highway and the incessant buzzing of insects all I could hear. Inside the hospital, the world turned a sterile white, too bright to see clearly. Nurses stood sentinel in every direction, at the nurses' station, coming in and out of patients' rooms, pushing carts of pills and machinery up and down the halls. A small city lived in this place, a city dedicated to keeping its inhabitants up and alive. How long had Jack been here? Was it months now, or only weeks? Waiting, wondering if the doctor's search would find him the only thing he needed, if his time spent here would be worth anything at all. Jack was an organ donor. If he died, his parts would be shared. Whatever someone else could use, he was happy to give. Why were others not so gracious? The dead didn't need eyes or lungs or kidneys. Give them away. I wondered sometimes how many hearts that could have been Jack's were rotting away in some graveyard, some crypt, where they weren't needed or wanted, just taking up space with the dead. How many were burned in crematoriums? How many cast into the sea? How many could have lived if those who died had been selfless? As I walked down the hall to Jack's room, I nodded hello to the nurses. They smiled back and went about their business, dispensing medicine and checking on patients. I was infinitely grateful to them. I still am. They're the only reason Jack made it as far as he did. At Jack's door, I stopped and knocked. Inside, the bed creaked, and a tired voice said, "Come in." His voice was strained, hollow, and so small. I opened the door and stepped into the dim room. Jack was lying on the bed, gazing absent-mindedly at the TV. The wires and tubes that surrounded him looked like a net, trapping him and holding him down, anchoring him to the beeping, blinking machines around him. He looked so small under them. He seemed thinner every time I visited. He looked over to see who it was, a visitor or a nurse bringing him his next dosage of who knows what. "Hey," he said, smiling, a dry crack in his voice. "Hey," I said, perching on the edge of his bed. "How are you holding up?" "I'm all right. Tired, I guess." He paused to yawn. "Kinda sad. I think I'm just sick of this room." I laughed and squeezed his hand. "You won't be here forever. You'll get better and you can go live your life again." "I hope so." He squeezed my hand back and let go. "It'd be nice to get back to work, back to my own house and my own bed." "And you'll be there soon. Trust me." He smiled. "I do." We sat there for a while, talking quietly about the day and its events, the machines beeping, the nurses passing by the open door. As we talked, he yawned more and more between words, golden eyes drifting shut. So I decided it was time to leave and get back to work. "I don't want to keep you up," I said finally. "I just wanted to check on you. Get some sleep for me, okay?" He nodded, barely able to keep his eyes open. "Okay, I will." I pulled the sheets up over him, covering the wires and tubes, all except for the oxygen tube running to his nose. He looked almost normal again, like the Jack I knew before. In the dull light, his brown eyes still shone, like amber, like honey. Duller now, a bit less wide and joyful, but still they shone. He smiled, and his eyes drifted closed again. "I love you, Jack." The softly spoken words trembled through the air, and a faint smile crossed his lips. "Love you too," he murmured, and fell asleep, breathing in time with the beeps of the machine beside him. I left, shutting the door behind me, hoping its quiet click didn't wake Jack. Down the hall, the doctor stood with a nurse looking over papers of some kind I couldn't see from where I stood. He saw me and nodded hello, then glanced at the clock. 2:08. I had time. I shoved my hands back in my pockets and left, eyes diverted from the harsh white lights of the hospital. Outside, back under the full moon and the orange lights of the parking lot, I felt the tension in my shoulders ease. No one around. I took a deep breath and headed out into the night. Between the buildings, the world was dark. The moon didn't reach far enough to light the alleys, and the side streets, while bright, felt desolate and dark, pavement cracked and trash scattered across the ground. The houses stood silent and dark, curtains drawn and doors bolted. It was almost peaceful, if not for the thought of what would come when another person did show their face. I decided these residential streets were too big a risk. More people, sure, but that meant more people to hear screams, more people to call the police, or barge in themselves to stop me saving Jack. I turned back towards the center of town, vacant lots full of weeds, crumbling brick buildings with the glass from their windows shattered and gone, all illuminated by the moon and a few dim streetlights. As I neared the part of town where things looked less run down, I took a turn and walked through the park. It was so different, neatly trimmed grass, trees with red leaves ready to drop, all so clean and pleasant compared to the deterioration outside. I walked the paved path through the park, listening for the sound of footsteps, people talking, anything to tell me where Jack's new heart might be hiding. Across the park, footsteps echoed. I stopped to listen, eyes scanning across the park, between the trees. And there he was, a young man walking through the park, head down and hands in his pockets, alone. I ducked off the path and into the darkness between the trees, waiting for him to pass. Once he was far enough along that he wouldn't be able to hear me following, I came back out and trailed along after him. The streets were silent, empty, apart from the two of us. I followed him for a distance, head down, eyes raised just enough to keep him in view. He turned down the decrepit street I'd come from before, probably headed back to one of the little houses just beyond it. I kept back a ways, waiting for him to get close to the dark patch between the buildings, but not too close, not close enough to be past it by the time I reached him. I ran and tackled him. He screamed and writhed, but I held tight and twisted his arms back behind him. A kick caught me in the leg, the sharp pain of it making me pause my attack, but I held firm and got him to the ground, pinned under me with his face in the dirt. "Get off. Let me go. Help," he shouted, still writhing, trying to knock me off. "Look, you can have my wallet, my phone, whatever you want. Just shut up. I don't care about your money." He wiggled some more, trying to break free, but he was caught. He panted, gasping for breath, shouting and pleading with me whenever his lungs found enough air to do so. I pulled my knife from its place on my belt and poised it above him. He caught a glimpse of it out of the corner of his eye and twisted to see what was happening. He rambled on, still squirming. "Please, please don't. Oh, God." High above us, the clouds parted, and the haze they sent over the city faded for a moment. The moon struck him, struck his eyes, his brown eyes, bright and wide, like amber, like honey, just like Jack's. I knew that golden glint. I knew it in every corner of my soul. I hesitated. For a moment it was Jack beneath me. Jack I was about to harm, not some stranger with his heart in his eyes. It was so strange to see Jack in a man I had never met, never even seen before that moment. Deep in my pocket, a small vibration broke me from the trance his eyes had me in. I reached in and pulled out my phone, the doctor's number flashing across the screen, awaiting my answer. I checked the time. I still had 17 minutes. "Hello?" "Jack is dead." I froze. "What?" "Jack Hoskins passed away in his sleep. His heart gave out. You're too late." He was silent for a moment. "I'm sorry." I searched in vain for the words to say, the words that would make it better, that would give me more time, another chance, something. This couldn't be how it ended. No, not Jack. Not alone in a hospital room while he'd been alone. I could have been there. I could have stayed longer, could have held his hand when he... No, I shouldn't have visited him at all. Should have gone right out to get another. Then I could have done it in time, gotten him his heart. He could have been fine. I could have saved him. I looked down at the man on the ground and put my phone back in my pocket. Jack's eyes stared up at me from his face, a man I didn't know and didn't care to. But the real Jack's eyes would never open again. If I'd been an hour earlier, an hour faster. I dropped the knife and rolled off the man onto the cold, damp ground of the alley. He scrambled up and ran, carrying Jack's eyes and Jack's heart away from me. I didn't chase after, didn't even get up at all. He would call the police and tell them what happened, and they'd find me here in this alley, staring at the dingy brick walls and wishing, wondering, questioning every move I made. What else I could have done. If there had ever been any hope at all. If I had known there was no hope from the start, wondering when Jack's heart had beat its last, and why I hadn't been with him when it did. And there you have it, a short story in a day. There's definitely some stuff I still want to edit in it. The pacing's still really off, and there's some repetitive bits in some of the writing. But we'll fix that, and it'll get better. I'm overall pretty proud of it. Thanks for watching. Bye.